The old janitor's hands trembled as he held the eviction notice. Standing in the empty hallway of Riverside Corporate Tower, where he'd cleaned for 23 years, invisible to everyone who passed him daily, but what nobody knew was that in just 7 days, he would become the only person who could save every life in that building. Marcus Thompson was 72 years old, his weathered face carrying lines that told stories nobody ever asked to hear, his gray uniform making him blend into the walls like a shadow that everyone acknowledged existed but never truly saw. And for over 2 decades, he had arrived at 4 in the morning to ensure every floor sparkled before the executives and employees arrived, never missing a single day, despite arthritis that made his joints ache and a loneliness that weighed heavier than any mop bucket he'd ever carried. The building's new management company, Apex Holdings, had decided that Marcus was too old, too slow, too expensive compared to hiring a younger crew, and Mr. Davidson, the building manager, who'd never once learned Marcus's name, despite seeing him every morning for 15 years, had handed him the termination letter with the same casual indifference one might use to throw away a worn-out tool, saying nothing personal, just business optimization before walking away to answer his constantly buzzing phone. Marcus had watched through the years as the people in this building celebrated promotions, birthdays, and successes in the very conference rooms he'd polished to perfection, had seen young interns become executives, had witnessed office romances bloom into marriages, had been there for every milestone except his own, which consisted only of arriving earlier each year as his body moved slower, ensuring his work remained impeccable even as his strength faded like autumn leaves surrendering to winter. Sarah Chen, a junior analyst on the 14th floor, had once dropped her grandmother's jade bracelet down a heating vent, crying at her desk because it was the last gift before her grandmother passed, and Marcus had spent his entire lunch break dismantling the vent system to retrieve it, placing it gently on her desk with a note that said "Found this." Thought it might be important, never revealing it had taken him 3 hours and bloodied knuckles to recover it, and Sarah had assumed maintenance had done it, never knowing it was the quiet janitor she passed every evening without a glance. Thomas Wright, the CEO whose office occupied the entire top floor, had built his empire on efficiency and cutting costs. His motto "Sentiment doesn't pay dividends" emblazoned on a gold plaque behind his desk, and he'd approved Marcus's termination without reading the name, just another line item in a spreadsheet that would save the company $42,000 annually, enough to partially fund his new executive bathroom renovation that would feature Italian marble. Marcus would never have the chance to clean. The security guard, James, who worked the night shift and was the only person who regularly talked to Marcus, had tried to argue against the firing, telling Mr. Davidson that Marcus knew this building better than anyone, that he'd prevented a flood 2 years ago by noticing a pipe about to burst behind a wall because he'd heard a sound nobody else detected. But Davidson had dismissed it, saying they had insurance for such things and younger workers could learn the building quickly enough. On Marcus's last scheduled week, he continued his routine with the same dedication he'd shown for 23 years, arriving in the darkness before dawn, his key ring heavy with keys to every room, every closet, every forgotten space in the building that held 42 floors and over 3,000 daily occupants who relied on systems they never thought about, pipes they never saw, electrical panels they never knew existed, all maintained and monitored by one old man who'd made it his life's work to keep them safe without recognition or thanks. Monday morning arrived with an unusual chill that made Marcus's bones ache more than usual, but he noticed something else, a subtle vibration in the building's foundation that wasn't there before, a rhythm that felt wrong to someone who'd spent so many years feeling the building's heartbeat through his fingertips as he cleaned, and he reported it to Mr. Davidson, who barely looked up from his phone to say, "File a maintenance request, though I don't know why you're bothering since Friday's your last day." Tuesday brought a stronger tremor that Marcus felt through the basement floors where he stored his supplies. and his decades of experience told him something was dangerously wrong with the building's structural integrity, possibly related to the construction happening on the adjacent lot, where they were digging deep for a new skyscraper's foundation. But when he tried to explain his concerns to Thomas Wright's assistant, she politely but firmly told him that engineering concerns were not part of a janitor's job description and suggested he focus on his cleaning duties for his remaining days. Wednesday saw Marcus discovering hairline cracks in the underground parking garage's support pillars, cracks that hadn't been there a week ago, spreading like spiderwebs through concrete that held the weight of 42 floors and thousands of lives. And he took photos with his old flip phone, printed them at his own expense at a pharmacy, and presented them to a board meeting he wasn't supposed to enter, only to be escorted out by security, while board members chuckled about the paranoid old janitor, trying to seem important before his retirement, not knowing Marcus had used the word retirement to save them the discomfort of knowing they'd fired him. Thursday morning at 3:47 a.m., Marcus felt the building shift on dramatically, but enough that his coffee mug slid 2 inches across the break room table, where he sat alone reading a newspaper by fluorescent light. And he knew with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of observation that they had perhaps, one day before, something catastrophic happened. So he spent the entire day leaving detailed notes about emergency exits, shut-off valves, and structural weak points at every workstation, in every office, on every floor. Anonymous yellow sticky notes that people absently brushed into trash cans thinking they were someone's old reminders, never reading the careful handwriting that could save their lives. Friday arrived with Marcus's replacement crew, 5 young people with matching uniforms and digital work orders on tablets, eager and efficient, but lacking the intuitive knowledge that comes from decades of dedication. And Mr. Davidson made a show of introducing them to various department heads, praising their modern methods and cost-effectiveness, while Marcus quietly packed his few personal items from the janitor's closet: a photo of his late wife Emma, a coffee mug she'd given him that read "World's Best Husband," and a small cactus that had somehow thrived in the windowless room for 15 years, the only living thing that had kept him company during countless solitary hours. At 2:15 p.m., as Marcus was returning his keys to Mr. Davidson's office, the building lurched with a grinding sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, and suddenly the confident executive who'd dismissed Marcus's concerns went pale, his phone clattering to the floor as the lights flickered and an ominous crack appeared in the ceiling above his mahogany desk, and he grabbed Marcus's arm with desperation, asking, "What's happening? What do we do?" And Marcus, without hesitation or mention of the ignored warnings, immediately took charge, saying emergency evacuation, but not the main stairs there directly above the weakest support pillars. We use the service corridors I've maintained on the east side. They're reinforced and lead 2 exits away from the construction site. The building's alarm system failed, its modern sensors unable to categorize the type of structural failure occurring. But Marcus's knowledge transcended technology as he moved through floors with swift purpose, using his master key to unlock passages most employees never knew existed, guiding groups through routes he'd mapped in his mind over 2 decades, his calm voice cutting through panic as he directed people like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony of survival, remembering every person who'd ever shown him kindness and ensuring they got out first. Sarah Chen, clutching the jade bracelet he'd saved, James the security guard helping elderly employees, even Thomas Wright's pregnant assistant, whom Marcus guided personally through a maintenance tunnel when the executive elevator stopped working. The new cleaning crew stood frozen in confusion, their tablets useless, their training inadequate for a building they'd known for less than 8 hours, while Marcus became the building's nervous system, appearing on every floor through service passages, his knowledge of every stairwell's capacity, every exit's location, every safe route, saving precious minutes as the structure groaned and windows began cracking from the pressure. And he remembered every single employee's usual location, checking offices that others might forget, the IT team in the basement server room, the mail clerk who always worked late, the accountant who wore noise-canceling headphones and might not hear warnings. Sarah Chen was trapped in a bathroom when the doorframe warped, and she screamed for help thinking she would die alone. But suddenly Marcus appeared with a crowbar he'd grabbed from a maintenance closet, leveraging the door open with strength that seemed impossible for his arthritis-riddled hands. And as he pulled her to safety, she finally saw him, really saw him, the man who'd been invisible to her for 3 years. And she gasped, "You're the one who saved my grandmother's bracelet," and he simply nodded, guiding her towards safety, while saying that bracelet deserved to stay in loving hands, just like you deserve to get home safe today. Thomas Wright found himself separated from his executives in his top-floor office as his expensive renovation began collapsing. The Italian marble cracking like ice, his escape route blocked by fallen debris, and through the dust and chaos, he saw Marcus appear like a guardian angel in a gray uniform, leading him through a ventilation access panel Wright never knew existed. And as they crawled through dusty shafts that Marcus navigated from memory, Wright wheezed, "Why are you saving me after what I did to you?" And Marcus replied without anger, "Because that's what decent people do. We help each other when it matters, regardless of the past." Mr. Davidson was coordinating with emergency services when he realized the building's blueprints were outdated, not showing the modifications and repairs made over the years. But Marcus had every change memorized, every renovation cataloged in his mind, and he drew detailed evacuation routes on Davidson's whiteboard from memory, his weathered hands steady despite the building shaking, showing fire chiefs exactly where to position ladders, which areas were most stable, where survivors might be trapped, his expertise suddenly more valuable than all the digital systems and modern management techniques that had replaced him. The building's western facade began buckling at 3:42 p.m., and Marcus knew they had minutes, not hours. But he also knew that Patricia from accounting was diabetic and had probably gone to the 3rd floor break room for her afternoon insulin. That Robert from HR had a broken foot and couldn't move quickly. That the daycare center on the 2nd floor had 17 children under the age of 5 who needed to be carried out. And he coordinated their rescues like a general who knew every soldier personally, sending the right people to help each person, matching strengths with needs, creating human chains of support that turned potential tragedy into collective triumph. When the fire chief asked how Marcus knew the building so well, Mr. Davidson finally spoke the truth he'd ignored for so long, saying he's been the guardian of this building for 23 years. We fired him today to save money, and he's the only reason we're all still alive. And the chief looked at Marcus with a mixture of respect and disbelief, seeing not a janitor, but a hero who'd memorized 42 floors of human lives and was determined to save every single one, regardless of how they'd treated him. The young cleaning crew watched in awe as Marcus directed the evacuation with an intimacy of knowledge they realized would take them decades to acquire, if ever. Understanding that they hadn't replaced an old janitor, but had lost an irreplaceable guardian who knew every pipe's flow rate, every wire's path, every beam's load capacity, every person's habits and needs, a human safety net that had protected thousands without them ever knowing it. By 4:15 p.m., the last person was evacuated. Mrs. Rodriguez from the coffee shop, who'd always given Marcus free coffee, and whom he'd personally carried down 12 flights of service stairs, despite his arthritis, screaming with every step. And as they emerged into daylight, she kissed his weathered cheek, saying, "You were always our angel, Marcus. We were just too blind to see your wings." And he held her hand as they watched the building's western wall finally collapse, knowing that not a single life had been lost because one invisible man had refused to be bitter about his invisibility, choosing instead to use it to save everyone who'd overlooked him. In the aftermath, as news crews arrived and reporters sought heroes to interview, Thomas Wright stood before cameras and said with tears streaming down his face, "The hero isn't me or any executive. It's Marcus Thompson. The janitor we fired this morning for being too old and too expensive. Who knew this building's soul and saved 3,000 lives, including mine. And if he'll forgive us and accept it, I'm offering him not just his job back, but a position as our chief building safety director with full benefits and the respect he always deserved, but we were too arrogant to give, and the crowd erupted in applause as Marcus stood quietly, his uniform dusty and torn, his hands bleeding from forcing open jammed doors, his body exhausted but his spirit unbroken. Sarah Chen started a fund that raised $300,000 in 48 hours for Marcus, with contributions from every person he'd saved, each donation accompanied by a memory of some small kindness he'd shown that they'd never acknowledged, fixing a broken chair without being asked, leaving encouraging notes for stressed employees, watering desk plants when people forgot, turning on office heaters for early arrivals on cold mornings. Countless invisible acts of care that had created an unseen foundation of compassion throughout the building. Mr. Davidson resigned his position, recommending Marcus as his replacement, writing in his resignation letter that true leadership isn't about managing from above, but serving from below. And Marcus Thompson taught me that a building isn't held up by its executives, but by its foundation. And he was our foundation all along, and when the board offered Marcus the position, he accepted, on the condition that every janitor, security guard, and service worker would receive better wages, benefits, and most importantly, respect and recognition for their essential roles. The building was ultimately condemned, but the development company that owned it faced no lawsuits because every person had been saved. And when they built the replacement structure, they named it the Marcus Thompson Tower and consulted him on every aspect of its design, incorporating his suggestions for safety features, employee comfort, and especially proper recognition spaces for service staff, including a memorial wall where every maintenance worker's name and years of service would be permanently displayed, making the invisible visible forever. 6 months later, at the new building's opening ceremony, Marcus stood in a suit for the first time in decades, surrounded by thousands of people whose lives he'd saved, and when asked to speak, he simply said, "For 23 years, I cleaned your offices, maintained your safety systems, and watched over you like you were my family, because to me, you were, even when I was invisible to you. And the greatest gift you've given me isn't this recognition or these titles, but the knowledge that when it mattered most, we all saw each other's humanity and acted on it, proving that no one is truly replaceable. No one is just a line item on a budget, and everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and thanked for their contribution, no matter how humble it might seem." And as he spoke, Sarah Chen held up her grandmother's jade bracelet. James the security guard saluted, Thomas Wright bowed his head in respect, and 3,000 people understood that the man they'd rejected had never rejected them, that love doesn't require reciprocation to be powerful, and that true strength lies not in position or youth, but in faithful service and seeing dignity in every role. Marcus returned to work, not as a janitor, but as chief safety director, though he still arrived at 4 a.m., because old habits carried comfort, and he instituted a program where every new employee spent their first day shadowing service staff to understand the building's true foundation, and he created the Guardian Angel protocol, a mentorship system where experienced service workers trained others not just in technical skills, but in the art of caring for a building and its people as if they were family, ensuring that never again would anyone be invisible in their workspace. Years later, when Marcus finally retired at 80, the building held a celebration where thousands attended, and a young janitor named Miguel, whom Marcus had mentored, stood to speak, saying, "Mr. Marcus taught me that a janitor doesn't just clean buildings. We protect them. We guard the people inside like shepherds guard their flock. And most importantly, we love without expecting love in return. Because that's what makes us irreplaceable, not our youth or efficiency, but our dedication to others' safety and comfort. And Marcus smiled, knowing his legacy wasn't in the building that bore his name, but in the hearts that had learned to see the invisible and value the humble. The story of Marcus Thompson spread beyond Riverside Corporate Tower, inspiring companies worldwide to reevaluate how they treated service staff, leading to what became known as the Marcus Movement, a global initiative recognizing that every organization's true strength lies not in its executives but in its most humble servants, those who arrive in darkness and leave in shadows but hold up the entire structure with their dedication. And thousands of janitors, security guards, and service workers finally received the recognition they'd always deserved but rarely received. On his 90th birthday, Marcus sat in his small apartment looking at a wall covered with thank you letters from people whose lives he'd saved, pictures from weddings he'd been invited to, graduation announcements from children who'd grown up hearing about the janitor who saved their parents, and he held Emma's photograph, whispering, "I kept my promise, my love. I treated everyone with kindness even when they couldn't see me, and in the end, they saw not just me, but all of us who serve in the shadows." And as he closed his eyes for an afternoon nap, he smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't in being remembered for what you achieved, but for teaching others to notice and value what they'd previously ignored. The Marcus Thompson Tower still stands today, and in its lobby, there's a bronze statue not of Marcus in a suit as chief safety director, but of him in his janitor's uniform, mop in hand, with an inscription that reads, "The ones we reject often become our salvation. The ones we ignore often see everything. The ones we consider replaceable are often irreplaceable. And the humble servants among us are often our greatest guardians." Dedicated to Marcus Thompson, who saved us all by never stopping caring for those who forgot to care for him. And every morning at 4 a.m., when the current janitors arrive, they touch that statue for luck and reminder that their work matters, that they matter, and that someday, when it counts most, the invisible become the most visible heroes of all.